Finally, the answers to all our problems. With a lot of work, we can understand our place in a world where, as it turns out, the rest of life seems to understand just where it ought to be. Big promises. We tend to forget, though, that all that life has learned to thrive here together for millennia before white settlers showed up. And just so happens we've built this city upon one of the most diverse series of ecosystems in the world. We live in an ecological wonderland. So it stands to reason that we too have become an ecosystem. Right here, we have everything we need to keep ourselves and our planet alive despite the irreversible effects of agriculture and industry. We'll get into how these environments work and why they help us in the next couple episodes, but for now, let's just ask, how do they help us, and when did it all start? Well, from where we are on the west side of Chicagoland, let's start just a short while ago, about 13,000 years. After a storied geological history as is, Illinois was struck with the ice ages. The first one was serious. The second one, a little less serious. I mean, it had humans, it hadn't destroyed the world yet. Ray Romano was a talking mammoth. It was great. In the late Pleistocene epoch, the last period of glaciers advanced and receded from northeastern Illinois. Now, ice is still water. It still flows, but only at a geological pace. And glaciers are big, and big means slow, but slow also strong. Glaciers, as they flow, pulverize bedrock wherever they go. And like leaves on a stream, all of that bedrock is deposited as silt, sand, clay, and sometimes whole rocks, hundreds or thousands of miles away from where they originated. Over that way, 13,000 years ago, there was the desolation of the Wisconsin glaciation. Dusty barrens, constant cataclysmic floods, relentless weather, pretty much what Nebraska will look like soon if we don't act fast. Over that way, there was the Wisconsin glaciation, a quarter-mile tall glacier pulsing with silty streams and rivers. Right here, for some reason, that glacier seized up a while, and those streams and rivers dumped a whole bunch of silt into a big silty hill called a moraine. This is the Tinley Moraine. In the chaos of frequent geological disaster, it took a while for all that sand and silt to find its place. About 11,000 years ago, Lake Chicago would have been well within view of here, and not until just about 2,000 or 3,000 years ago did Lake Michigan find its modern shoreline, and in all that time, the prairie woodland mosaic of our region began to take its shape. We are extremely lucky where we live. Not just for the ice age, but also for those moraines. And it makes a lot of sense that one of the world's greatest cities would grow up right down there. But this place is not only home to an exceptionally rich diversity of humans, but of all other forms of life too. They're still alive here and kicking, the most of them. We just seem to have forgotten about them, except as a place for our pavilions and our bike paths. Such richness of organisms is responsible for making this place so ideal for human settlement. And many of the severe weather problems and whatnot that we encounter now, they've had thousands of years to find solutions for. Chicagoland sits where 3 national ecoregions connect. Every ecoregion is composed of smaller, more specific ecosystems, which we can distinguish by how all the living and non-living things there function. That is, how they react and interact. We'll dive into these functions in the next few episodes, but know that between these ecosystems, we have a transitionary zone called an ecotone, setting the tone for the next ecosystem you're about to enter. All in all, in Chicagoland, we have about 23 different ecosystems that some scientists distinguish. However, those could be broken down into even much smaller ones based on the soil, the water, and the plants that associate with those specific conditions. Generally, though, these fluctuations can be simplified around here into 3 very basic ecosystems. That is, woodlands, savannas, and prairies. That is the balanced mosaic that lends us such biodiversity and so much natural resource. On the uplands, prairies thrive in sun, storm, wind, blizzard, and wildfire especially. Deeper in the watershed, woodlands grow denser and denser until they reach the floodplain. And in between, insulating the woodlands and the prairie, and allowing nutrients and resources to transfer between them is the savanna. Along just one stretch of the Salt Creek watershed, smack dab in the heart of Chicagoland, we have several kinds of floodplain forest, buttonbush swamps, wet and dry tallgrass prairies, flatwoods, ancient oak, hickory, woodlands, marshes, swales, walnut woodlands, low canopy forest, bur oak savannas, sedge meadows, and much, much more, constantly in flux, ever changing and reacting to one another, until sometimes all those changes and interactions will stabilize and result in an ecosystem that is self-sustaining for a while, but not forever. Humans, however, have set in motion a whole new kind of ecological succession, one never before seen, unpredictable, and extremely dangerous and deadly. Just like the city of Chicago, the wilds of Chicagoland require a radical amount of time, work, and collaboration. Every single organism here is dependent upon all the others. For example, all living things on Earth need nitrogen to live, but plants can't breathe nitrogen. In order for these grasses to get along, they need the legumes around them that have special habitats in their roots for microbes to live that can turn the gas nitrogen into the solid ammonium, and only if those legumes died back every year so that microbes, fungi, and insects could release that ammonium to the grasses around them. To spread in the first place, the grasses need those storms and that wind, and especially the wildfire. And the legumes need, well, birds and bees, literal ones. These are the kinds of connections that make this world livable for us. Okay, if analogies aren't your thing, let's look at some numbers. Let's say you took all of the preserved natural areas within 50-mile radius of Chicago and made it into a national park. For one, not only would it be the 24th largest of 63 national parks in the country, it would be the most biodiverse in native vascular plants by far, 1,706 species. Now, let's look at one national park that's within the Chicago region. Indiana Dunes, which sits just beyond the 50-mile radius, at only 24 square miles, has 1,196 native vascular plants. And nearly every single one of those is dependent upon some kind of insect, fungi, or microbe for their existence, and in the case of Indiana Dunes, most of those can't really live anywhere else. And when you look at monocultures as the invasive plants that we've brought to this country can show and prove, there's a severe cultural neglect for this intricacy that provides us with the health and resources we have. So what then do all these plants, microbes, fungi, and whatnot have to do with you? What about the silt that the glaciers dropped, or the wildfires that used to burn here, or the water flowing underneath your feet? If you decide to start learning about it, you'll never run out of things to do. But there's plenty of activities people do outside. I'm sure you've heard of the most of them. Even if that's not your steez, just having this stuff around is good for you in ways science cannot fully describe, but has begun to describe. Here's a bit of what science has figured out so far. Cities create a lot of problems for our mental health. And many of these problems can be alleviated just by our access to green. Green spaces, green infrastructure, that's parks, green belts, bioswales, nature preserves, and engineered ecosystems of all varieties. This is especially relevant when many of the demographics that live in our least green spaces in the city are poorer, less fortunate, more discriminated demographics that cannot arrest the same opportunities without the access to the same resources that your average white suburban might have. For starters, living amidst an abundance of green spaces is proven to have an up to 55% decrease in mental health issues such as anxiety disorders, depression, substance abuse. Neighborhoods with well-designed, maintained, and staffed green spaces show less crime and more access to socialization and education. Illinois counties with more trees end up amounting far fewer medical costs. Simply having this stuff around even encourages you to exercise, not just your body. Having the opportunity to learn and engage outdoors in the field is shown to enhance our learning abilities, not just for all sorts of STEM and art-related topics, but for therapies, physical and mental. However, though we know that these things happen, we don't really understand why they happen. So let's move on to something a little more solid, tangible. You like drinking water? breathing air, eating food. Farms are an ecosystem. And just as the health of Chicagoland's nature is dependent upon its biodiversity, each and every one of those organisms and the ecosystem functions they provide increase each other's productivity. Designing farms as ecosystems and in such a way that unites existing natural lands allows the nutrients to move seamlessly from one environment, like a prairie, to another, like a soybean farm. Synergistic plants, fungi, and microbes provide way more nutrients to your crops. They keep the soil rich and wet for far longer than industrial farming methods. They attract the natural pollinators and predators that can deal with pests affecting your crops, and they mitigate the polluting effect that farming tends to have on the surrounding air and local water supply. Okay, water. Let's talk about that. Our native ecosystems and the soils they have helped to create for, about the last 13 millennia, have learned a lot about keeping water clean and nutritious. Many of the pollutants that wash off of our pavement from our cleaning, our building, our farming, our everything, can be captured, metabolized, and otherwise broken down by the healthy plant communities and the fungi and microbes, known and unknown, that they help maintain. This is a huge expense saved on us. Soil loss, phosphorus, nitrogen, copper, zinc, even illness-causing pathogens can be greatly or almost entirely reduced by having healthy plant communities along our waterways and our paved areas. That's why it's necessary for us to have intact wetlands, floodplains, green belts, and bioswales along our waterways and our paved areas where these pollutants collect. We spend far less on cleaning water, and cleaner water is more available to more people. If we want an invitation to this party, we have to make sure that our wetlands, our floodplains, and other aquatic environments are left alone, maintained, or engineered, not developed or destroyed. Cleaning water is very expensive, and diverting it only moves the problem elsewhere. And oftentimes, the polluted waters and floods are redirected to communities that can't afford to fix it or divert it, worsening the population's health and crippling their social mobility. But the consequences extend well beyond water quality and well into natural disaster. Ask the River Galeen or the Warren Dunes, once both living, developing ecosystems dependent upon each other's health, now falling into the sea, along with the towns that people built upon them, like New Buffalo. But those prairies and wetlands are good for more than just our water, okay? Knowing that plants consume greenhouse gases and exhaust oxygen, and knowing that nitrogen and carbon are essential to all life on Earth, imagine, if you will, what that means when a prairie or a wetland go from this to this every single year. That's loads and loads and loads of nitrogen and carbon being taken out of the air and put right back into our soil where it can be used every single year. Woodlands are great for this too, but prairies and wetlands are by far the most efficient and upscalable and cheap mechanism of carbon sequestration by far. And we can fit these spaces everywhere. Think about all the places that people don't really use. Their lawns, tree lawns, public medians, and along railroads and highways and everything else. Just imagine what that would look and feel like if you took a bunch of city planners, gardeners, ecologists, and public workers and told them to make this kind of beauty work everywhere. I can imagine it now. Science and engineering have made some pretty messed up stuff, eh? But science and engineering can also be beneficial to all life on Earth. Even before science, though, our natural environments are ingrained in us by countless generations of culture and tradition and spirituality. Ancient heritages may seem more arbitrary to us nowadays, but at the core of each of our cultures is the same dependency on the same planet between all of us. And now we have abused that planet to the point which we are certifiably, scientifically entering the 6th mass extinction of earthly life. But it's not just the world we're killing, it's ourselves and our cultures. I don't want to see the planet that our grandchildren will live on if we don't stop this rapid domination of all life on Earth. Rapid enough to lose hope. But when I say this stuff has all the answers, I don't just mean the philosophical ones. How does the earth do so darn much? I'd be exhausted, I'd be spent. We'd all be if we had to do this all by ourselves. But for now, let's just chew on these concepts. Biodiversity is essential to ecological health. And as a part of that ecology, ecological health is our health. We'll get down to the nitty-gritty in the next couple episodes. Just know that with all of the sophisticated natural processes that the Earth has developed over the course of millennia, now, due to our neglect of those very processes, we cannot return to the state the Earth knew before civilization. That's why we've started to call this period of Earth's history the Anthropocene. We're here now. We have to be extremely careful and creative to secure our species a livable future, but we have to secure every other species the same livable future for that to work. The tools that will help us in this objective, well, they're long past their prime, but we need to understand how they change and react to each other, how they functioned before us, in order to understand how they'll change in response to our future abuse and how they'll work to our use. So, in the spirit of looking towards the past for visions of the future, I leave you with a quote from John Madson's philosophical and scientific homage to the tall grass prairies where the sky began. Take care of yourselves, folks, and your planet. Remember, the Earth lives and dies with us.